Living alone has its perks, but nothing could have prepared me for the absolute nightmare of dealing with my utility bills last spring. You know how it starts, just a regular day, checking the mail, sifting through junk, until I saw that dreaded envelope from the power company. But this time, something was seriously wrong. I remember staring at my bill, thinking there must have been some mistake. $847? That's when I pulled up my previous statements. For 3 years straight, my bills had never gone above $200, even during the hottest months. I'm Diana Reynolds, a software engineer who works remotely, and trust me, I know my numbers. The weird part? This wasn't just a one-time thing. The previous 2 months had been just as bad, but I'd written them off as winter heating costs. Looking back, I should have known better. But when you're coding for 12 hours a day, some things slip through the cracks. That night, I couldn't sleep. The numbers kept swimming in my head, and that's when I heard it, this low, persistent humming sound coming from somewhere outside. At first, I thought I was imagining things, when you're sleep-deprived and stressed, your mind plays tricks on you. But no, it was definitely there. I grabbed my robe and decided to investigate. The sound seemed to be coming from my next-door neighbor's property, specifically, that massive greenhouse she'd built last fall. Victoria Blackwood, our oh-so-prestigious HOA president, had been bragging about it at every community meeting. It's state-of-the-art, she'd say, showing off photos of her prize-winning orchids and exotic plants. At 58, she made quite a name for herself in local gardening circles. Standing in my backyard at 2 a.m., watching the faint purple glow coming from her greenhouse, something clicked. The timing of my sky-high bills perfectly matched with when her greenhouse was completed. But that was crazy, right? There couldn't be a connection. The next morning, I decided to be direct about it. I walked over to Victoria's perfectly manicured front lawn, past her Best Garden award signs, and rang the doorbell. She answered wearing gardening gloves and her signature pearl necklace, looking like she just stepped out of a Better Homes and Gardens photo shoot. "Diana, dear," she said with that condescending smile of hers. "What brings you here so early?" I showed her my utility bill. "Victoria, I've been having some unusual spikes in my power and water usage. I was wondering if you've noticed anything similar." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Oh, that's concerning. But I don't see how it would have anything to do with me." She pulled off her gloves, one finger at a time. "Perhaps you should check your appliances. Old water heaters can be quite the energy hogs." "My house is only 5 years old," I replied. "Everything's up to date. And the strange thing is, I keep hearing this humming sound at night coming from your direction." That's when her smile turned cold. "Are you implying something, Diana?" Because I must say, I don't appreciate accusations from someone who clearly doesn't understand the complexities of home maintenance. She leaned forward slightly. I couldn't help but notice your hedges are 3 inches above regulation height. The HOA has been quite lenient so far, but the threat was clear. I'd seen Victoria in action at HOA meetings, systematically destroying people's lives with fines and violations until they either fell in line or moved away. But something about her reaction told me I was onto something. "No accusations," I said, matching her smile. "Just being a concerned neighbor." "Those utility bills are quite the mystery, aren't they?" As I turned to leave, Victoria called out, "Diana, sometimes it's better to leave mysteries unsolved, especially when you work such long hours. It would be a shame if work stress started making you imagine things." Walking back to my house, I felt her eyes boring into my back. The conversation had confirmed my suspicions. Something wasn't right. The way she jumped to threats instead of showing genuine concern, how quickly she dismissed the possibility of any connection. That evening, I sat at my computer, utility bills spread out around me. The numbers told a story. My power usage had tripled, and my water consumption had doubled since Victoria's greenhouse appeared. And now that I was paying attention, the humming noise was constant, starting every day at sunset and continuing through the night. I pulled up the HOA regulations about utility connections and external structures. Nothing specific about greenhouses, but there were clear rules about separate metering for significant power-consuming additions. Victoria would know these rules by heart. She'd written half of them herself. As I closed my laptop, a notification popped up, another automatic payment to the utility company, draining my account. This wasn't just about money anymore. Victoria's thinly veiled threat and her immediate jump to intimidation tactics had made this personal. I picked up my phone and called the utility company. It was time to get some real answers. But as I waited on hold, watching the purple glow from Victoria's greenhouse reflect off my kitchen window, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to uncover something much bigger than a simple billing error. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a battle that would expose years of deception and shake our entire neighborhood to its core. The next morning, I wasted no time calling the utility company. After being bounced between 4 different departments, I finally reached someone who seemed to actually care, a technician named Robert who specialized in unusual consumption patterns. "Ma'am, based on what you're describing, this definitely isn't normal," Robert said, his voice turning serious. "I can dispatch a team to check for any unauthorized connections, but I'll be honest, in my 15 years doing this job, sudden spikes like this usually mean someone's tapping into your lines." That same afternoon, 2 utility workers showed up at my house. They spent hours checking every inch of my property, and what they found made my blood boil. Hidden beneath a row of Victoria's award-winning hydrangeas were unauthorized connection points, professionally installed and cleverly disguised. They'd tapped into both my water main and electrical lines, running them straight to her greenhouse. "This is some professional-grade work," one of the technicians whistled. "Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Must have cost thousands to set up." I took photos and videos of everything, documenting every illegal connection. But the real shock came when the technicians started talking to each other about similar cases they'd seen in our neighborhood. "Wait," I interrupted. "You've seen this before. Here." They exchanged glances before the older technician spoke up. "We're not supposed to discuss other cases, but let's just say your street has had some interesting service calls over the past few years. Always the same pattern: high bills, confused homeowners, and mysteriously resolved issues once certain people were confronted." That night, I couldn't sleep. I set up my laptop and started digging. As a software engineer, I know my way around data analysis. I created a neighborhood map, marking houses with sudden utility spikes based on public records. A pattern emerged: every house bordering Victoria's property had experienced similar issues at some point. But I needed more proof. I invested in a high-end security camera system, installing cameras with night vision capabilities at strategic points around my property. I also bought a professional-grade power monitoring system that could track usage patterns down to the minute. Within days, I had irrefutable evidence. The data showed massive power draws starting precisely at sunset, coinciding with the purple grow lights in Victoria's greenhouse. The water usage patterns were equally damning, large volumes of water being drawn during automated irrigation cycles for her precious plants. I decided to talk to my other neighbors. First was David Thompson, a retired judge living 2 doors down. When I mentioned utility bills, his face darkened. 3 years ago, he said, pouring us both coffee. My bills went crazy for about 6 months. Then suddenly, Victoria offered to help me optimize my utility usage as part of some HOA initiative. The bills dropped right after she inspected my property. More neighbors shared similar stories. Eleanor Martinez, a local teacher, had nearly gone into debt from her bills until she threatened to sell her house. Mysteriously, her bills normalized the next month. The pattern was always the same: astronomical bills followed by Victoria swooping in to help. But the real breakthrough came from Benjamin Foster, the previous HOA treasurer who'd moved away last year. After tracking him down online, he agreed to video chat. "Listen carefully," he said, looking nervously over his shoulder despite being in another state. "Victoria's greenhouse operation isn't just about winning garden competitions. She's been running a lucrative business selling rare orchids and exotic plants to collectors. We're talking thousands of dollars per plant." When I started asking questions about her garden expenses, she suddenly had enough votes to remove me from the board. The pieces were falling into place. Victoria wasn't just stealing utilities. She was running an entire illegal business operation. The HOA position was her perfect cover. Who would question the person making the rules? I spent weeks gathering evidence, building an airtight case. Security footage, utility records, testimony from affected neighbors, and documentation of Victoria's plant-selling business. But just as I was preparing to present everything to the HOA board, Victoria made her move. It started with a certified letter citing 17 different HOA violations on my property. Apparently, my house color was slightly off beige, My mailbox was 2 inches too tall, and my garden gnome, which I didn't even own, was unauthorized. The fines totaled over $15,000. Next came the police visits. Victoria had reported suspicious activities at my house. 3 times in 1 week, I had to explain to officers that no, I wasn't running a meth lab from my home office. The final straw came when she started spreading rumors about my mental health at neighborhood gatherings. Poor Diana, she'd say in that syrupy sweet voice, all those long hours alone, working from home, it must be affecting her mind. She's been making such wild accusations. But Victoria had made a crucial mistake. In her eagerness to discredit me, she'd gotten sloppy. One evening, I recorded her entering my property at 3 a.m., attempting to dismantle one of my security cameras. The footage was crystal clear, our distinguished HOA president, in her designer gardening boots, trespassing and tampering with private property. More importantly, I discovered something that would blow this whole case wide open. Hidden in the HOA's financial records, which I'd obtained through a former board member, was evidence that Victoria had used association funds to pay for her greenhouse's construction. She'd classified it as a community improvement project, complete with forged approvals. The stage was set for a showdown that would shake our quiet suburban community to its foundations. But as I prepared to present my findings at the next HOA meeting, I realized this wasn't just about high utility bills anymore. This was about holding accountable someone who'd spent years manipulating and exploiting her neighbors for personal gain. Victoria had no idea what was coming. Her greenhouse empire was about to come crashing down, and I had front row seats to what promised to be the most explosive HOA meeting in our community's history. As I organized my evidence for the upcoming meeting, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Victoria's precious plants, which she'd nurtured with stolen water and electricity, were about to become the instruments of her downfall. Sometimes karma needs a little help getting started, and I was more than happy to give it a push. The quarterly HOA meeting fell on a sweltering July evening. I arrived early, setting up my laptop and documents as board members and neighbors filtered into the community center. Victoria strutted in last, wearing her signature pearls and a self-satisfied smile that would soon be wiped from her face. Before we begin our regular agenda, Victoria announced, I'd like to address some concerning behavior from one of our residents, Dad. Actually, I interrupted, standing up. I've submitted an emergency motion to discuss unauthorized utility connections and misappropriation of HOA funds. I clicked my presentation remote, and the screen behind me lit up with damning evidence. The room fell silent as I methodically laid out my case. Utility records, bank statements, construction permits with forged signatures, security footage showing Victoria tampering with my cameras, photos of the illegal connections. Then came the testimonies. One by one, my neighbors stood up. David Thompson presented his old utility bills. Eleanor Martinez shared her story of near financial ruin. Even Benjamin Foster appeared via video call, explaining how Victoria had orchestrated his removal from the board. But the knockout blow came from an unexpected source. Remember Robert, the utility technician? He brought along records of similar cases spanning 5 years. Victoria hadn't just tapped into my utilities. She'd been running this scheme across multiple properties, moving her connections whenever someone got suspicious. Victoria's face turned from red to white as I revealed her private greenhouse business. These aren't just hobby plants, I explained, pulling up screenshots from exclusive auction sites. She's been selling rare orchids for thousands of dollars each, all grown with stolen utilities and funded by misappropriated HOA money. This is ridiculous. Victoria exploded, jumping to her feet. These are baseless accusations from a disturbed individual who dashed. Is this baseless too? I asked, playing the security footage of her midnight trespassing attempt. The room gasped as they watched their HOA president skulking around my property like a common criminal. That's when the police officers I'd invited stepped forward. Turns out, utility theft and misappropriation of HOA funds are serious crimes. Victoria's face crumpled as they began reading her rights. But karma wasn't finished with Victoria yet. While she was being processed at the police station, a freak power surge hit our neighborhood. Remember those professional-grade electrical connections she'd installed? Not so professional after all. The surge fried her greenhouse's entire electrical system, including the climate controls. By the time Victoria made bail the next morning, her precious greenhouse had turned into a sauna in the summer heat. Hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of rare plants, dead or dying. Her illegal business literally withered on the vine. The fallout was spectacular. Victoria was forced to resign from the HOA board and faced multiple criminal charges. The investigation revealed she'd stolen over $180,000 in utilities and HOA funds over the years. She was ordered to pay restitution to all affected homeowners, plus substantial fines. Her reputation in the gardening community? Destroyed. The local garden club stripped her of all awards and banned her for life. Those Best Garden signs she'd been so proud of? Removed and destroyed in a special ceremony that the whole neighborhood attended. But the sweetest victory came 3 months later. Unable to afford her mortgage after paying restitution and legal fees, Victoria had to sell her house at a massive loss because who wants to buy a property with a dead greenhouse attached? The new owners? A lovely young family who immediately tore down the greenhouse and installed a community vegetable garden that everyone could share. As for me, I was unanimously elected as the new HOA president, though I promised to use my powers for good, not evil. My first act was to install a comprehensive audit system for all HOA finances. My second was to remove those ridiculous hedge height restrictions. The humming noise that started this whole investigation? Gone, replaced by the sound of neighbors actually talking to each other, sharing gardening tips, and building a real community. Sometimes at our neighborhood gatherings, we joke about the great greenhouse scandal, but it taught us all a valuable lesson. Never underestimate a software engineer with high utility bills and time to investigate. Victoria still lives in town, in a small apartment with nothing but a few sad-looking succulents on her windowsill. Sometimes I see her at the grocery store, pearl necklace conspicuously absent. She always hurries away when she spots me, which is probably for the best. After all, I hear her new electricity bills are quite reasonable. The best part? Every house in our neighborhood now has a smart utility monitoring system, paid for with recovered HOA funds. Nobody will ever have to wonder about mysterious utility spikes again. And if they do, well, let's just say I know a thing or two about investigating them. As I sit in my backyard, enjoying the sounds of children playing in the community garden that replaced Victoria's greenhouse, I can't help but smile. Sometimes justice comes with a utility bill, and karma, well, karma just needs the right evidence to get to work. They say sunlight is the best disinfectant, but in Victoria's case, it was also the perfect karma. Her precious plants might not have survived the heat, but our community emerged stronger, closer, and definitely more transparent. And me? I learned that sometimes the biggest victories start with the smallest suspicions and a really high electricity bill.